If you've ever heard someone say, we need to use metadata in SharePoint, and immediately thought, okay, but what does that actually mean? Then this video is for you. Metadata is one of those SharePoint concepts that can sound much more complicated than it actually is. But once you understand it, it completely changes the way you think about organizing information in SharePoint. In this video, I'm going to explain what metadata actually is, the different types you can use, when you should use them, and how things like the term store fit into the picture. And most importantly, I'll show you how to decide what metadata you actually need. Because the goal isn't to add metadata everywhere, it's to add the right metadata. The biggest reason metadata confuses people is actually simple. We really understand folders. We've been using folders on computers and network drives for decades. You create a folder, put a document inside it, and you know where that document lives. Then we move into SharePoint, and suddenly people start talking about taxonomy, content types, managed metadata, and term sets, and it sounds incredibly technical. But underneath all of that terminology is actually a very simple idea. Metadata is information that describes your content, helping SharePoint understand what it is so it can be organized, found, filtered, governed, and used more effectively. And one of the easiest ways to understand why we need metadata is to look at what I call the filing cabinet trap. This is something I've seen in organizations over and over again. They migrate from a network drive into SharePoint, but they bring their network drive thinking with them. So instead of changing how information is organized, they simply recreate the same huge folder structures inside SharePoint. You end up with folders inside more folders, and eventually nobody really knows where anything belongs. You get duplicated documents, information silos, poor search results, and people clicking through 5 or 6 folders trying to find just one file. Here's the fundamental difference. Folders tell SharePoint where a document lives. Metadata tells SharePoint what that document is. And that distinction is incredibly important. A document might be a policy owned by HR, relating to Australia, with an approved status. Instead of hiding all of that information inside a folder path, we can describe the document using metadata. So let's make this really practical. Metadata simply means information about information. Imagine we have this PowerPoint presentation. The file itself is called sales presentation, but there's much more we might want to know about it. What type of document it is? A presentation. Which department owns it? Sales. Which region does it relate to? Australia. What's its status? It's approved. When should it next be reviewed? The 31st of December in 2026. All of those additional pieces of information are metadata. And now, SharePoint doesn't just know that a file exists, it starts to understand what that file represents. And this is why metadata matters more now than it probably ever has. Metadata helps us find, filter, group, and search information. It allows us to build useful views, create reports, automate processes, and apply governance. Microsoft 365 Copilot, SharePoint agents, search, automation, and other AI-powered experiences all work better when the information underneath them is well organized and has useful context. Now metadata isn't some magic switch that suddenly makes Copilot perfect, but good information architecture and good metadata give Microsoft 365 much better signals about your content is and what it actually is for. Without structure, SharePoint is essentially storing files. With structure and metadata, we start turning those files into organized, understandable information. Now, this is where people often make metadata harder than it needs to be. Not every piece of metadata should be created in the same way. SharePoint gives us different column types because different types of information need to behave differently. We have text, multiple lines of text, numbers, dates, people, choices, the lookup columns, and managed metadata. The important question isn't which column type is the best. There isn't one. The question is, what kind of information am I trying to capture, and how will that information be used? First, we have text columns. Text is best when the value is unique or unpredictable. Think about things like a contract number, an asset ID, a product name, or an invoice reference. You can't realistically create a predefined list containing every possible contract number. So allowing someone to enter text makes sense. Where text becomes problematic is when we use it for something that should be consistent. Department is a classic example. If I let everyone type their own department, one person might enter human resources, another enters HR, and someone else types people and culture. SharePoint now sees those as 3 different values. So a simple rule is, if consistency matters, free text probably isn't your best option. Multiple lines of text is designed for something completely different. This is where you want people to provide richer, written information, such as comments, detailed notes, project summaries, descriptions, or lessons learned are really good examples. What you generally don't want to do is use a big text field as a classification system. If you need to filter, group, report, or consistently categorize information, you're usually better off using structured metadata. Think of multiple lines of text as context rather than classification. Number columns. They are exactly what they sound like, but choosing the correct data type still matters. They're useful for budgets, costs, quantities, scores, percentages, and other numeric information. The benefit of storing a number as an actual number rather than text is that SharePoint and other tools can work with it properly. You can calculate with it, filter it, report on it, and use it in tools such as Power BI. A useful design principle here is to think beyond what the value looks like on the screen. Ask yourself, what might I want to do with this information later? That often tells you which column type you should use. Dates are particularly useful because so many information management processes are time-based. You might have a review date, expiry date, approval date, or renewal date. Once those dates are structured as metadata, they can drive much more than simply displaying a date beside a document. You can create views showing documents due for review. You can trigger notifications. You can build Power Automate workflows, and you can support lifecycle and compliance processes. So something as simple as a date column can become part of a much larger information management process. Person columns connect information directly to people in Microsoft 365. So instead of typing someone's name into a text field, you can select an actual user. You might use this for a document owner, a reviewer, approver, manager, or project lead. This is useful because SharePoint understands that this value represents a real Microsoft 365 user. This means you can filter information by person, use that person in workflows, and build things like a Documents I Own view. Again, we're giving SharePoint more structured information that it can actually do something with. Choice columns are probably one of the metadata types you'll use most often. They give users a predefined list of values to select from. Status is a perfect example. Instead of allowing people to type whatever they like, we might give them 4 choices within status, such as draft, review, approved, and archived. This keeps the data consistent and makes it incredibly easy to filter, group, and build views. Choice columns are especially useful for metadata that is local to a particular solution. And that word local is important because if the same classification needs to be reused across many sites or across the organization, That's when we need to start thinking about managed metadata and the term store. The easiest way to think about the term store is as SharePoint's corporate directory. Instead of every site creating its own version of department, region, or business unit, we can centrally manage those classifications. The structure is fairly straightforward. At a high level, we have groups. Inside those groups, we have term sets. And inside a term set, we have the individual terms. So we might have a term set called department, containing terms such as finance, HR, and marketing, and IT. Those same approved terms can then be reused across SharePoint. If the organization changes a term, we can manage that centrally rather than trying to update dozens of separate choice columns. That's what makes the term store so powerful. It gives us a single source of truth for shared business classifications. Now there's another important design decision. Where should you actually create your metadata? Not every column belongs in the term store. If a piece of metadata is only needed in one library, creating it directly at the library level may be perfectly appropriate. If several libraries within the same site need to reuse the same column, a site column may make more sense. And if a business classification needs to be shared consistently across multiple sites, something like department, region, or business unit, managed metadata through the term store may be the better option. One of the biggest mistakes I see is over-engineering this. Not everything needs to be managed metadata, and not every possible piece of information needs to become a mandatory column. Too much metadata creates friction. If users have to complete 15 fields every time they upload a document, they'll hate the system, and quite often they'll just enter rubbish just to get past the form. Good metadata should make information easier to manage, not make people's jobs harder. So when you're deciding how to create metadata, ask yourself a few simple questions. Will this classification be reused consistently across the organization? If yes, managed metadata may make sense. Will multiple libraries within a site need the same column? Then consider creating a reusable site column. Is this a controlled set of values that only applies to this particular solution? A choice column may be all you need. And if the value is genuinely unique or unpredictable, simple text may be perfectly appropriate. The key message I want you to remember from this video is this. The goal isn't to create more metadata. The goal is to create the right metadata. In the next video, I'm going to take you into SharePoint and build a complete document library from scratch. We'll create our department, document type, and document status classifications, work with the term store, create different column types, and I'll explain exactly why I'm choosing each one as we build it. So if you want to see how all of this works in a real SharePoint environment, watch that next video. Thanks for watching, and if you want to learn more about SharePoint and Microsoft 365, subscribe to the channel and visit simplysharepoint.com.